you're going to need a lot more protein when you're on gear.
Folks, I'm Dr. Mike of Renaissance Periodization, and this gentleman here is Menno Henselmans, and he is an expert researcher in sport and exercise science, and he dabbles, not occasionally, but all the time, in sport nutrition, and he has a message for you. It's that you are two things, at least. One, potentially eating more protein than you need, and two, by that logic, a stupid bad person who should have no friends, even if he currently has them. The second part I made up, but the first part might have some truth to it. Menno, I always thought that to maximize my muscle growth, I need to eat somewhere between 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day, meaning if I weigh 200 pounds, I need 400 grams, and as much as possible. Am I wrong?
You are wrong.
No way.
You are wrong.
I've never been wrong, but go ahead, entertain us.
So one of the I think it might still be the most popular article I've ever written. It ranked #1 on Google for a long time.
Fuck
it was
off.
one of the, when people still used Google.
What is Google? Is that something ChatGPT talks to when I ask it questions?
Yeah, no, unfortunately it talks to Bing.
Unfortunately it does talk to Bing.
If only it talked to Google. But Bart might fix that at some point. Anyway.
If Bart can do anything at all.
Yeah, it's not so great yet. But so I wrote an article looking at how much protein you really need. And my perspective on that article was, okay, I'm just going to ignore what everybody says. And that has basically become my modus operandi, like how I operate. I'm just going to ignore what everybody says. I'm trying to go in with a completely blank mind. I'm just going to look at the empirical data on this, assuming that we have it. Turns out we actually had a lot of empirical data. We had a lot of studies, including bodybuilders, powerlifters, seriously trained individuals. Tarnopolsky in the 90s have been doing really good research with very, very serious lifters. Like
Tarnopolsky and Bird invented protein, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, they had really solid research already. And I looked at all of that research, and I came to the conclusion, if you look at the research that's controlling for nutrient timing, so it's the same amount of meals at the same times, but different amounts of protein, there is not a single study that has found benefits of more than 1.6 gram per kilogram per day. Now, in your freedom units, freedom unit guy?
Freedom is so fucking great.
In freedom units, so in the imperial system, that is 0.82 gram per pound per day. No, that's actually the 1.8. That's already the up marker. So I applied a triple sigma to that to get to the 0.82 gram. Yeah, it's a method from business, basically, to account for excess variation in individuals. Because, just because it didn't benefit the averages in 10 studies or so at the time, might mean that some individuals have an extraordinarily high requirement for protein, and therefore we do what's called a triple sigma method, where you add some of the variation back in there to the average. Now, that gets you about to 1.8 gram per kilogram per day, which is 0.82 gram per pound per day. Total protein intake based on total body weight. That is enough for basically everyone, with a few exceptions that we can get into later. And research has not found any benefits of more than 0.71. Yeah, that's 1.6, I think, gram per pound per day. Now, that has been tested subsequently in a study that I co-authored myself, a randomized control trial. Further, also in another meta-analysis with some of the best researchers in nutritional sciences that we have in fitness. And we found, again, exactly the same threshold. That was the breaking point in the meta-analysis, where we just look at all the data together. After that point, the curve just completely flattens for lean body mass gains. And we also see that in muscle thickness, strength development, all the gains you want, including fat loss, body recomposition, anything. So that's pretty much for the vast majority of natural individuals that are not vegan, don't have muscle memory, and aren't doing concurrent training. That's pretty much all you need.
Let's get into those nuances. I'm on more drugs than Rich Piana could swat a stick at.
You're not natty?
I am right now. I don't have needles in me.
Okay.
Do I need more protein, or just as much or less? Because I've heard that you can definitely process more as a drug person. Your fractional synthetic rate is higher, total body, but also your feed efficiency is higher, so you absorb and utilize more protein when you're on drugs than not. Do those roughly cancel out? What is your reading of that sort of situation?
Yeah, so this is a funny situation where I think you don't actually need hard numbers in the data. because there will be people that say, well, protein synthesis goes up, we know that, but muscle protein breakdown goes down because you get higher feeding efficiency, your body excretes less nitrogen when you're on androgenic anabolic steroids. So what's the net effect? Some people say, well, the feed efficiency is so great that you actually need less protein. And to that, I would say that even though we don't have hard data on this, it is almost certainly complete nonsense. You're going to need a lot more protein when you're on gear. There have been a few studies that looked at the protein synthetic response in people taking gear. And by taking gear, we're talking about 200 milligrams testosterone, that kind of stuff.
That's a lot. That's a hard cycle.
That's a hard cycle. Yeah.
Guys, in retrospect, anything remotely respectable in pro bodybuilding is north of 1,000 milligrams. Please continue.
Yeah. So even like TRT plus dosages, basically, we see, and these days that's normal TRT if you're on YouTube. So if you're on like TRT plus, we already see like 50% increase in muscle protein synthesis. Does muscle protein breakdown go down? Yes, a little bit. But we're talking about a several-fold difference in the response because the body is an efficient organism. If you consume protein, there is a massive increase in the amount of protein synthesis that it will stimulate. Meaning, if you're doing strength training, consuming a lot of protein synthesis goes up a lot. Protein breakdown doesn't change as much. Even if you go into like a 40% energy deficit, we see in studies, some studies there's no change in muscle protein breakdown. You need to go into like a hard deficit for a long time to make any difference in muscle protein breakdown. Why? Because muscle protein breakdown is not efficient. The body breaks down proteins when it has to, when it's remodeling tissue. There's some protein breakdown is needed to build new muscle. It's like when you build a house and you build a balcony to the house, it's like making your muscle bigger. You can't just tag on the balcony to the exact house. You need to remodel the outside, build the balcony on, and then it fits together. It's the same with muscle growth. So that's what muscle protein breakdown is for. And that is even more efficient, which is already very efficient normally, when you're on gear. That's going to make a minor difference to your protein requirements. In turn, you're going to have a massive spike in muscle protein synthesis. Why is this relevant? I think it's even relevant for natural trainees because it explains why we see that professional bodybuilders take enormous amounts of protein. They actually benefit from it. And I think this is an extremely large difference between natural and enhanced trainees, where natural trainees look at pro bodybuilders and muscle magazines are happy to feed into that because they can sell you more protein supplements. It does actually work for pro bodybuilders. You need a whole lot of protein. For natural trainees, research is very clear. More than 1.8 gram or 0.82 grams per pound per day of total body weight protein, all total protein, including not so great sources, is enough. You want at least 50% of your protein, by the way, from high quality sources. That's the assumption made with that total protein requirement.
How much more, Menno? And I know you're going to be guessing, and I have my own guesses, but my guess is you need, if you're a 200-pound individual, you can maximize your protein intake as a natural, eating something like 150 to 170 grams of protein per day. If you are enhanced, it strains my imagination to think you need much more than 200 to 220 grams of protein per day. Am I wrong?
We don't know because we don't have hard data on this. But this is very interesting, I think. And we have a few lines of evidence that we can look at. We can look at directly at muscle protein synthesis. That seems excessive because that would suggest that even, like I said, with like 200 milligrams testosterone, your protein requirements go up by like 50%. Imagine what happens when you're taking a gram plus. The other line of research we can look at is what the pros are doing. Now, I'm normally not a fan of that at all. The whole thesis of being evidence-based usually means that you're looking primarily at scientific research and not so much about what the pros are doing, because what the pros are doing can vary depending on which pro you look at, what they're taking, their own genetics, what works for them, whether you're looking at them now versus 10 years ago versus 10 years into the future. So I think most people look way too much at what the pros are doing, but in this case, since we don't have hard data, I think it does make some sense to look at the pros. And we have a decent review where they concluded that most pros take like 2.3 to 3.1 gram per kilogram per day, I think.
That's per kilogram, not per pound, folks.
Yeah, so that's like up to 100% more protein than what natural lifters need. I think that's probably a decent ballpark to go by. And I think probably the rule of 1 gram per pound, which is kind of bro lore, that's probably not a bad idea for bodybuilders up until, kind of Arnold's era. That seemed to work for them. And that has stood the test of time. So I think that the 1 gram per pound, that makes sense if you're cycling sometimes or taking like low dose cycles by today's standards.
Very interesting. Definitely contrasts with some of my views, and I might have to do some updating. Just kidding. I've never been wrong and never will. I don't actually learn things. I intuit them directly from the universe.
That saves time.
It's great. It's easy. A couple more questions. I have an announcement to make. I'm a vegan. Did you know that? I'm now better than all of you. How much protein do I need? Is it more than the natural recommendations?
Yeah, a lot more, potentially. Research on this has, at first, pointed very strongly in the direction of you need a whole lot more protein because your protein quality is so low. Like the digestibility is poor, the amino acid composition is poor. It's not the amino acid composition that the body has, which high quality sources have, like meat. Meat is very similar to human meat in that the amino acid ratio is quite similar, which means you're consuming protein in like a whole package in the same ratio approximately that you have in your own body. So we can simplify the process what the body actually cares about, like the individual requirement of all the amino acids, especially the essential ones. We can simplify that to just saying protein in total. And that's nice. We like that. It's very simple. If you're a vegan, you cannot do that. Because if you do the math and you have some protein sources that are very low in lysine or leucine or any other essential amino acid in particular, it turns out that you will need like 3 times or more protein to get all of those amino acids in. So if you're not looking at your sources of protein, then theoretically, based on the amino acid composition and not even factoring the lower digestibility, you need a whole lot more protein. Now, research studies over the last few years have shown that the body is actually remarkably capable of using the free amino acid pool and storing protein in either the digestive system or the amino acid pool and combining proteins quite well across the day so that you don't need like a perfect mixture of amino acids every single meal.
It'll kind of drag out what you need.
Yeah, and it's also quite capable of synthesizing the non-essential amino acids, and yeah, it's very efficient overall. So it turns out that it's probably not nearly 3 times as much. And my typical recommendation is, if you just want to make it simple, rely heavily on a blend of 80% pea protein, 20% rice protein. That has a really good protein quality. Digestibility is very high. Amino acid ratio is very good for a vegan source. It's pretty much as good as it gets. And then I would say about 2.1 grams per kilogram per day. So that's like 10, 20% markup versus the normal 0.82 grams per pound per day that you would need. And I think then you're 100% okay. And you can do that on a meal basis too. Like if you have one vegan meal, some people freak out about that and they feel like, oh, I need high quality protein every single meal. You can also use a vegan protein shake, add say 20% more protein to it, and you're probably also good.
Okay. I have another announcement to make. I'm female now. First of all, it's fun. I've just been flicking the bean all fucking day. Now that I'm a female person, how much protein do I need? Because you said something earlier that piqued my interest. You were of the supposition that a high level of androgens can really increase protein requirements. Men have something like 20 times the androgen load of women on average. Does that mean they need, I'm not going to say 20 times the protein, that's fucking ridiculous. Even as a joke, that wasn't funny. Someone's going to get that out of context somewhere. Do males need more protein than females?
Probably not. So this has been analyzed both directly and indirectly. Directly in a meta-analysis on nitrogen balance studies, which aren't the greatest, but they found that women actually had a small trend towards lower protein requirements. And in general, research on direct protein metabolism and the effect of sex on that, biological sex. You didn't catch on to that? No, I 100% expected it, Mike. You're very disappointed.
Versus
immature
procedural sex.
Yes. Romantic sex.
I don't know what that means. I've never had it. I've read a picture book about it once. It looked scary and it looked like they were fighting.
Right.
Have you ever had sex?
No, I don't do that. I just read.
My man.
Yeah. They found that it's about 10% lower in women, the protein requirements based on nitrogen balance. And that was not statistically significant, which means I would, since protein is so important, I would not consume less protein as a woman, especially because for women, it's so much easier to get your protein in than if you're a heavy guy. If you're 100 kilos as a guy, if you're like Mike, it's work to get your protein in. If you are...
You're saying it's work if you're a heavy bitch?
That is also work.
All right.
But if you are a 50 kilo bikini competitor, it really isn't difficult.
Pause. I'm not going to ask you your body count because that's personal, though I know it is quite high. You are so legendary. What is your single body maximum weight count. No names.
What?
What's the
Oh,
biggest
okay.
bitch you've ever been with in the bedroom? And I need the number in kilos and pounds, man. I mean, nobody playing no more. The time for games has come to a fucking end.
Okay. I would say that's probably about 80 kilos.
So like 185 pounds?
Yeah, I would guess so.
Man, that ain't shit. You're playing with the fucking minor leagues. Lizzo,
Yeah.
if you hear this, I'm a married man. But in an alternate universe, every part of your fucking body, girl, I won't miss a fucking bit, every inch. We're doing something to it. Anyway, that aside, protein, females, where were you?
Yeah. So I would not go lower than, I would use the same recommendations as for men. There have been 2 recent studies as well that kind of came to similar conclusions, both in endurance trainees and strength trainees. So just use the same standards. And if anything, you might be able to go a little bit lower, but I wouldn't risk it.
Got it. Another caveat. All these people studied are, well, to use the vernacular I'm familiar with, pussies. They don't train like me. They don't go to 24-hour fitness in the Los Angeles metro area and yell literally at weights 5 days a week like I do. And they sure as shit haven't seen a Rich Piana video. And so they don't know how to train hard. So don't I need a lot more protein than these fucking bitch-made motherfuckers in these studies?
Yeah, that's an argument actually I got a lot. And the answer is absolutely not. Most people dramatically overestimate how hard they train compared to people in research.
That's you.
If you look at, for example, the Tarnopolsky studies, they had competitive bodybuilders training 1.5 to 2 hours per day. So yeah, if you think you train harder than those and the powerlifters and the Olympic weightlifters and all those people, even then, if we look at the research on training to failure, you don't actually get that much more of hypertrophic stimulus. But if we're looking at, 2 absolute complete balls out failure versus 2 reps in the tank. So I don't think that argument makes any sense at all. And it turns out that there are actually a lot of serious exercise scientists that look at serious training individuals. Unfortunately, we have also a ton of research on untrained individuals, but we're looking at a body of research here that's like 50 plus studies deep.
I had another change of heart. I got into a time machine and I made myself much older. I'm now 67 years old. Do I need a ton more protein?
Based on the latest meta-analysis on this, you do not. But you do need to distribute it into bigger servings. So it seems that older individuals have a higher leucine threshold. You need more protein per meal to stimulate a robust anabolic response. If you just consume some milk in your coffee, that might not trigger an anabolic response. So you need probably 3-4 meals per day. I probably wouldn't go higher. Also generally not necessary to go higher unless you really prefer it. And make sure you distribute your protein relatively equally among 3 to 4 meals per day. If you have the same total protein, that's fine. Because on the other end of the spectrum, your protein synthesis is also going to be a lot lower. In that sense, it makes sense, I think, that while there's a higher protein requirement per meal, the total protein requirement across the day is not going to be higher. I mean, you're not going to build more muscle. If you look at it from a standpoint of muscle protein breakdown and synthesis, your requirement in the end is always based on the sum total of what you need to avoid breakdown and what you need to stimulate synthesis. If synthesis goes down a lot for any reason, whether it's because of age or genetics, or it goes up because of drugs, usually protein requirements will follow along.
That is all super, super helpful. I have 2 ideas I want to share with you, and I'd like for you to either give me the nod of approval or tell me how you think maybe they're misapplied. My thought about enhanced bodybuilders, this is all tentative, it's up for change with available evidence and more reasoning. I'm not overly convinced that enhanced bodybuilders need that much more protein than everyone else, because while they do have larger protein needs, in another sense, the MPS curves are higher significantly. I also think that the amount of protein your body shuttles towards muscle is a much smaller fraction than people think. Most of the amino acids you eat go to total body functions, and a lot of them just go to intestinal cells and skin cells, which you lose fucking pounds of all the time. You ever been around me? I shed a lot of skin. I have actually like a fucking snake. Every day I wake up in a different skin. And so my idea is, if you are an enhanced bodybuilder, try 1 gram per pound per day to 1.5 grams per pound per day. Somewhere between there, you'll find that good idea of protein. Wrong, right, somewhere in the middle, don't know. Mena, what do you think?
I mean, it's tough. I would err on the side of high protein intakes because my idea with gear is if you're going to use gear, you want to make sure that you get the most out of it. And yeah, it's inconvenient, but just suck it up. If you're
Literally.
yeah, protein shakes, whatever it takes. And to the extent that it might help a lot. Maybe you don't need it. Certainly, lots of bodybuilders have gotten big with just normal kind of protein intakes. But if it might help, and it's basically the alternative to more gear. It's going to be very beneficial to your health. So I would err on the side of, suck it up and just get all the protein you need. Go, Kai Green, Jay Cutler, they basically, Ronnie Coleman, they were like just protein feeding machines.
Ronnie Coleman ate like 2 times his body weight per gram per day. You think that's not excessive? Potentially utilizable.
2 times body weight?
Yeah.
Per pound.
Per pound.
I mean, at his dosages with his genetics,
Yeah.
I don't question that, honestly.
Okay.
I think it's reasonable.
Another thing I say is I think just for imperial convenience, gram per pound per day is enough protein to give you one simple number to remember. And it obviates the need to consider very highly the degree of protein quality. And because that's not a crazy excessive difficult amount of protein, what I usually tell people is absolutely, if you have a more nuanced reading of the literature, you can take in less if you're drug-free. If you're enhanced, maybe you can take in more. But a gram per pound is a really good place to start for a lot of people if they want one simple answer. What do you think about that? Poke some holes in that.
Sure. I mean, I would say you're going to have to do some math with your macros anyway. So unless you're, really limited mentally, I think there is a big benefit for most individuals to know that they're fine with 1.6 and certainly with 1.8 gram per kilogram. Again, 0.7 to 0.8 gram per pound, because it also opens up your menu to a whole lot of other foods. And protein is expensive. Protein can be not the most satiating or not the most palatable food to eat. Satiety is another factor, by the way, if you want to get into that. And also, it opens up your menu to things like cheese, which otherwise just aren't really on the menu without massively going over your fat intake. So yeah, there are a lot of benefits and really just no need to go higher in protein. You have to do your macros anyway. So the simplicity argument, I mean, it's reasonable, but I think if you're at all serious about training, then use the accurate number.
Okay, 2 more things. Talk about protein and satiety. I heard that protein makes you more satiated, less hungry, but I've heard a very good retort by you saying that, yes, if you just generalize by all 3 macros, protein is the most satiating of all 3, but that misses a really, really big forest for the trees, and that is the fact that there is a subcategory, especially of carbohydrates, called green veggies, which have by far a bigger effect on satiety for calories. Thus, if you're cramming extra protein to stop hunger, maybe you should be cramming extra veggies and fruits and whole grains instead. Is that a rough summary of your views? Did I miss something?
Yeah, theoretically, the idea in many researchers' minds still is that protein is simply more satiating because it has higher effects on the gut hormones that mediate your satiety. So basically, protein inherently, just any source of protein, you consume it, it changes the hormones that your body has, and therefore you get full more than if you consume carbs or fats. Now, in research, we know that based on the protein leverage research, that is only true up until the point of requirement. Our body has a specific appetite for protein, kind of like salt and water, where you kind of keep eating, you stay hungry until you've had enough protein. And the body has sensors for that. It's absolutely not perfect. It's not the case that you can just eat based on intuition and you will get enough protein, especially not for bodybuilders. But it's pretty decent. And in particular, if you have a very low protein diet, like you have the average Indian diet, for example, then you're almost certainly going to overeat because the body doesn't stimulate satiety because it's like, well, great, you got in a lot of sugar, but I still want the protein. We still need the amino acids. So if you look at the research, and I did that in great detail in my book, you can see after the point of, like we just discussed, the point of which muscle protein synthesis and the like are all maxed out, At that point, we don't see anymore that protein is inherently more satiating. And then you get to the point where we can't just look at protein versus carbs versus fats. You can't do that in general anyway, because we're talking about foods. People don't eat protein, people don't eat carbs. That's just us crazy bodybuilders obsessed with thinking, what am I eating? I'm eating carbs. That doesn't make any sense. Like, what kind of carbs? Are you eating broccoli or are you eating pure dextrose? Because metabolically speaking, that's a completely different food. Satiety-wise, completely different food. So when we start looking at specific food choices, the idea that all protein sources are universally more satiating, especially in the case of someone who's optimizing their protein intake, than carb and fat sources, is complete bonkers. It's nonsense. Green veggies, even beans, potatoes, in many research studies, are more satiating, certainly, than whey shakes. How much does a whey shake fill you?
0.
I get hungrier. If I'm fasted, I consume a whey shake, I actually get hungry.
Rebound hypoglycemia.
Yeah, so...
What about fresh fruits?
Yeah, they
filling.
can, yeah, exactly. They can also be much more satiating. I think the harmful effect that we've seen in flexible dieting, if it fits your macros type circles, is that people consume protein of any source at the expense of other foods that are a lot more healthy, possibly more palatable, cheaper, and just better for your health and diet in a lot of ways. In particular, these fibrous carbs. You can go home rest assured that you also don't need more protein for satiety reasons. And I have actually co-authored a study where we looked at this in strength-trained individuals, 1.8 versus 2.7 gram per kilogram per day, so like 50% excess protein versus optimal protein intake. Across a wide variety of measures, we saw no benefits for satiety, so for appetite, hunger, how many calories they eat if they're not tracking, no differences.
Very awesome. One last thing. I have a new identity now, since it's, 2024. I tried all the stuff. I had my pronouns on my bio. I didn't get any more followers. Took those down. Rainbow flag, the usual. Nothing worked. Now I have become an infinifat. So I weigh 300 kilos, 660 pounds. Is it true that I need 500 grams of protein as a natural and 750 grams of protein as an enhanced? Or is there some kind of lean body mass calculation that we can do?
Yes. In this case, I agree with Eric Helms that lean body mass is the better measure. For most individuals, I think it doesn't matter, because any accuracy that you gain from using lean body mass, especially if we look at the research, which really doesn't find big differences between individuals at all, surprisingly. So body weight's probably already overcorrecting. It finds that if you look at obese or overweight individuals, Eric Helms' recommendations are probably more accurate than using total body weight, because you would have wildly excessive protein intakes because their body weight's so high. So then I would say 2.3 grams per kilogram lean body mass. That's the better recommendation. So that replaces the 1.8 gram per kilogram total body weight if someone is overweight. The extra accuracy that you get from using lean body mass is offset by the unreliability of estimating your body fat percentage in the first place. So people think, especially for theoretical reasons, lean body mass must be better than using total body weight to estimate my protein requirements. But that requires knowing your body fat percentage. And even if you're using a DEXA scan, that can easily be off by some 5%. So any accuracy that you think you gain there, in research, it just doesn't pan out. You don't actually get a more accurate reading of your total protein requirement. It just overcomplicates things for no reason. You can use that. I don't think it's worse, like Eric Helms' recommendations, but I don't think it's necessary. In the case of overweight individual, I think Eric Helms' recommendations are better to avoid wildly excessive protein intakes.
What rough body fat percent do I start considering myself overweight? Or what visual characteristics? Am I looking for overhanging fat? What am I looking for to start looking at lean body mass versus just regular body mass?
So depending on which organization you look at, you're looking at something like 21% body weight for men and 31% body fat for women. At that point, you start becoming overweight.
And really just kind of if I have like a little fluffy fluff.
Yeah, if there's absolutely no abs detectable as a guy and you do have a certain amount of muscle mass, you're starting to get there usually. So, and in general, your body weight, BMI is even not that bad to go by in this case. I think most people, if you're far from abs, you're probably overweight. Actually, I think it's a harsh reality that for a lot of people in fitness, they are actually overweight or pretty close to it. I've had lots of clients who are like, oh yeah, lift, especially guys, women not so much, but lots of guys, they're like, yeah, I'm finishing my bulk phase now, and I think I'm, probably 16% body fat.
18 at most, bro.
Yeah, exactly. And in reality, then I'm like, I think you're 21 plus for sure. Like you're in the 20s. And I've even had a few cases where like they were just completely mind blown, and they did a DEXA scan. I was like, yep, 25. So
That sucks to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that difficult to get overweight.
Menno, this has been incredibly illustrative. This may be our most informative video on protein yet, including all the videos I made, which were fucking dick compared to this. Folks, my #1 content creation tip for you is to stop learning things and have people on your channel that know things already. I've been Dr. Mike. This is Menno Hensemans. See you guys next time.